Today is World Mental Health Day, and I've been saving this conversation around stigma for today specifically, because that is the theme of focus as such for this year's campaign around mental health is the stigma around mental illness in particular. So statistically, 1 in 5 Australians will be affected by mental illness personally. And that's just statistically, that's just what, let's say, people have owned up to or admitted. I would almost hazard that the real number could even be higher because of the stigma that can get in the way of us having these conversations, of us allowing ourselves to acknowledge that we might be impacted by a varying degree of mental illness or wavering mental health. So if you think about 1 in 5, that's a lot. And it doesn't mean that 1 in 5 people are broken. It just means that it's a lot of people around you that you love and care about that could be affected in this way. So how is there even still a stigma to address and to talk about here? And with stigma, I want to bring in the topic of shame around that. And that with shame, shame is insidious, right? If you've ever read or watched or listened to anything by Brené Brown, if you haven't, I highly recommend it because she's amazing. But she is a shame researcher. So she has a lot of actual valid research around shame and vulnerability and a lot of other things, but particularly around shame and how we as humans process shame or don't process shame and how that can show up. But essentially, shame is insidious. It can only exist when it is kept in the dark. It can only grow when it's not acknowledged, when it's hidden away, right? But as soon as we shine light on a shame feeling, whether or not, and this part's really important, whether or not that shame feeling is valid, when we shine light on shame, it tends to dissipate a little easier, at least. It doesn't hold the same heaviness. The same feelings in some way might be there, but it won't be shame anymore. It'll be what's underlying the shame, right? Which is more powerful to acknowledge. But shame is very insidious and it's very detrimental to how we feel and our general vibe, right? It's really low vibe. But it's also detrimental to how we show up and how we have conversations with others and how we acknowledge what's going on for ourselves. So when that's connected to mental illness or mental health, or that, maybe we just need a freaking mental health day every now and then, there's an element of shame that is risked. It doesn't necessarily come in, depending on where you're at in so far as how comfortable you feel with acknowledging those things. But there's still an element of risk that can come in around shame when we say, hey, I'm not feeling super mentally great right now. And when we say that to others, or when some of us might hear that from someone, there's a lot of stories that can be made up around what that means. And then it becomes well, how volatile is this person? Is this person reliable because they have something going on mentally with their mental health, right? So it creates a lot of stories. And sometimes with stigma, if those stories are enacted upon either in thought process by the person creating the stories, in judgment, in actual actions, like how they respond to that, then that can build on the shame layering, which can create more of a shame spiral. So it gets kind of complicated, but also not. It can be weirdly simple at the same time. But why, when there are 1 in 5 Australians, again, statistically, likely more, but when there are 1 in 5 Australians who are impacted by mental illness in some way, and that can be on any place on the spectrum of mental illness. It can be anywhere from needing a mental health day to more chronic or intense experiences of different degrees there. I'm not going to pretend to to order them because there's no order. But when we acknowledge that we need to take care of our mental health, or that we're feeling like we need to take time out, and take time is the Queensland Mental Health Week theme as well, which I'll be talking about in my next post. It won't be a video, it'll be a post. But when we acknowledge that we need to take time to take care of our mental health, and remember that mental health is something everyone has because we all have a mental state. Mental health is not the same as mental illness. They are connected for sure. But when we talk about mental health, it is literally every human. So you cannot deny that you need to take care of your mental health, just like you can't deny that you need to take care of your physical health, right? But when we acknowledge that we're in a space, we might acknowledge in the workplace. So I've spoken about workplaces a lot and corporate well-being a lot this week. I generally do anyway, but in particular in these videos, I've spoken about that a lot this week. In high performance arenas, so athletes and elite teams, and in emergency services, and in the military and veterans, that they are high performance arenas in their own right, because there is a high degree, well, literally a high degree of performance that is required in order for them to carry out their work and their job and their position. So all of these things, especially in those high pressure arenas of all of those ones that I've mentioned, and others for sure, when we acknowledge, hey, I need to take time out to just address my mental health at the moment, there can be a bit of a recoil from the culture. I'm going to say the culture, not the people, but from the culture around them. I know that in the military in particular, to go see the psychologist is generally seen as a little bit of career suicide. Just to go see someone to talk through shit in maybe one of the highest pressure careers or jobs that one could have. Like, why the fuck wouldn't you, right? Like, and why wouldn't that be okay? And why is there this perception that we need to get through everything on our own, without talking shit through, without having someone hold up a mirror or a sounding board and go, hey, okay, like, here's a safe space for you to just like talk shit out, because that's important as part of processing, and processing is important so that we don't hold it all in and it doesn't become this metaphorical Mack truck that comes our way trying to get our attention until it hits us, right? So why wouldn't we go to someone who can create that safe space, hold up the mirror or the sounding board, and help us process what goes on within us as part of being humans? And this is not limited to those high pressure scenarios. This is just what I talk about in my work, but this is also individual, regardless of what you do. As part of being human, as part of having a brain that is functioning, there is mental health to take care of. So there's this whole stigma around what it means to ask for help. And if you think about it beyond mental health, like, you know, if you're in the workplace and you ask for help because you're just a little overloaded and you just want to get something done, right? There can be judgment around that as far as your capabilities. So then when you add in, oh, there's something going on for me internally that you can't see, but I can feel it, it makes it challenging to explain when there's this element of judgment that is returned. But you probably already know all of this. You probably either experience it yourself, or maybe you dish it out yourself. Maybe you're aware that you have this perception of mental health or mental illness, and you have disagreed with me this whole time. If you've even watched this far, if you have, genuinely congratulations. But it's about removing the stigma, because when we hold people in shame or hold ourselves in shame, and that can happen a lot through stigma, because we're worried about what other people think. We're ashamed of how we've shown up, or we're ashamed because we should be feeling a certain way and we're not. So something's wrong with us. We're ashamed because we are not perfect. And guess what? We're not perfect. That's the beauty of us anyway. But when we hold people or ourselves in these shame stories, through stigma, through general judgment and prejudice and everything else that can go on, in particular around mental health, because it's so hard to show it, what is going on, because it's not a physical affliction, we keep people small and we keep ourselves small. If we're the people, if we're the ones holding shame around ourselves, we keep ourselves small. If we are the ones holding shame around other people and what's going on for them, we keep ourselves small. And I don't know about you, but I try to live a life of not playing small, because it doesn't serve me, it doesn't serve anyone, it's not satisfying at all. And it's not what we're here to do. So if nothing else, I implore you to take a look at how you really truly perceive mental illness. I'm going to start using mental illness in this instance. How you perceive mental illness and how you perceive it within yourself when you're not feeling great. Because you ever have one of those days where you want to take a sick day and there's nothing wrong physically, so you can't? That's a mental health day that you're craving. Far out. But consider how it is you show up for yourself, and what shame stories you hold around yourself. And it can be really confronting to look at, but I promise you, if you just acknowledge and say enough, say, I have a shame story around this, you don't need to do anything with it. And unless you have someone around, you're in a safe space, I recommend have a safe space to process it. But if you acknowledge, I have a shame story around this, I guarantee at that very minimum, it will start to untether itself. And you'll feel like, instead of having that vice grip around your neck or around your chest, you'll be able to breathe a little more. So acknowledge where you hold shame stories for yourself, but also acknowledge where you might hold shame stories for other people. Maybe you're in a workplace and there's someone in your team that does deal with some mental health things going on. How do you shame, even internally, about how do you shame them? How do you judge them? And what happens if you flip the script and just shift that a little? And even that will make a huge difference. So yeah, food for thought.